In this video, I'm just going to walk you through an example of using the Mobile Learning Activity Design Analyzer. This tool can be used in two slightly different ways. It can be used to evaluate an existing activity to see whether it could be improved, or it could even be used to evaluate a design that's still in progress in order to refine it and make sure that it fully leverages learning theories that are appropriate. So this is the first page of the analyzer. Now normally we would be using this on a mobile device. It's developed in HTML5 and JavaScript so that it adapts nicely to mobile device screens. Doesn't look quite so good in a normal desktop browser, but it's easier to make this type of recording, so the look and feel is actually somewhat better on many mobile devices than it appears on this computer screen. The first page is simply an introduction. It basically explains that there's a series of steps where you're asked to evaluate some statements. There's 20 statements relating to learning theory, and each of those statements appears on a 5-point slider, and you're asked to evaluate each part of your design or implementation against each of the sliders, ranging from this particular statement is not at all relevant to my design, or the maximum of 4, this is the primary content. And at the end we'll see some results. So let's get cracking and see how it goes. So what I'm going to do is click the next button, and it takes me to the first page, and you can see there's a bar at the top that says there's actually 7 pages of data gathering. Now what I'm going to do is just take one of the examples that I've done before of a mobile learning activity, and I'm going to evaluate it against these various measures. That particular activity involved a group of students using a pre-existing activity that used a GPS application, took them to various locations, and asked them to take various environmental readings using the sensors on their mobile devices. And then it asked them to record those values on a shared spreadsheet for later analysis. So that's basically the design that I'm going to evaluate here. So if I look at the various questions, for the first question here, to what extent does the activity involve outcomes that learners can observe and measure their progress against? Then I have to say that in this particular activity, the outcomes were not particularly well defined, so it was a rather open-ended activity. Well, maybe that's not a bad thing, but in this particular case, I would say that there wasn't much. I'm going to give that a 1, so not a 0, but pretty low. I won't spend quite so long on each of these questions because this is just a demo, but I shall start going through fairly quickly from this point. Testing whether learning outcomes, again, not really, not so much. Giving feedback to learners on progress. To some extent, the GPS locations tracked progress and gave some feedback. Maybe not so very much. I'm going to give that a 2. Positive reinforcement, to be honest, not really anything specific. I'm going to leave that a 0. And press next. You can see on each page there's a previous button. If I want to go back and change my mind, I can do so, but I'm just going to keep moving. For now I'm on page 3. Sequencing of materials, yes, there was a fair amount of that. Control of the learning process, not really, it's a very guided process, so I'm just going to give that a 1. Opportunity for reflection, yes, at the end, although not particularly well structured in that activity, it was fairly open. Construction of knowledge, yes, certainly did, but maybe there could have been a bit more of that. Okay. Cooperatively and collaboratively create knowledge, yes, definitely. In fact, that was quite a core part of the activity. I'm going to give that a 4. Collaborative technologies, there was a shared spreadsheet, but maybe we could have made a lot more of that. I'll give that a 1. It could be a 2, but I'll give it a 1. Cycle of experience and observation, up to a point, but not really in the sense that there was only one cycle, so ideally there could have been some more experiences there, so I'll give it 1 because there's no repetition, no iterations. Conceptualization, experimentation, yes, a little bit. Taking measures using environmental sensors, so I'll give that a 2. And I'll go now much more quickly through this, just as an example. Authentic context, yeah, pretty high. A little bit of that, yes, not really, okay. Shared learning, yes, a little bit of that too. not so much. Probably that couldn't really be said. Transferable, no, not really. Diverse sources, yes. Some of those. Yes, a little bit. And yeah, a little bit of that too. Okay. So what I end up with is this feedback. And this feedback, this chart, shows me to what extent my existing mobile learning design is addressing these learning theories: behaviorism, constructivism, experiential learning, situated learning, communities of practice, and connectivism. And you can see that it comes up on this little chart here, giving me a feel for to what extent my activity is or is not leveraging some concepts within learning theory. I didn't do that well. You can see that constructivism's strong-ish, although there's still quite a bit more I could have done. But if I look at connectivism, for example, that's particularly low. I can see the numbers here if I hover over these blocks. I'm just going to go down and look at the rest of the advice I've been given. So here are my scores, and I can see that constructivism was quite strong. Situated learning, communities of practice, not so bad, but I wasn't really making much of these other theories. There's a couple of suggestions down here. So one is, what the tool actually does is it picks the thing that's strongest and then sees whether you could enhance that a little bit more. And it also picks some ideas from where we're not doing really much coverage at all and seeing whether we could perhaps consider some of those. So constructivism was quite strong, but there's more that we could do. We could give the learners more control of the learning process. We could give them more reflection time. We could allow them to a bit more actively construct their own knowledge and work more collaboratively with others to create that knowledge. So there's some ideas for how I might revise my design. And also it picks up the fact that connectivism was rather weak. It suggests I could use some more collaborative technologies. We could build some perhaps transferable social media skills, and maybe cover more diverse sources, more creation of artifacts, and so on. And now I've seen this, I can start to see that I could take some of this advice. So, for example, instead of leading the learners through a specific set of GPS locations, we could give them a little bit more agency over where they go and what they measure at those locations. We could extend out the existing collaboration online, which currently just consisted of a spreadsheet, a shared spreadsheet, and make a lot more of that, and perhaps look at getting some specific outcomes that we share across social media or other collaborative technologies. So this is just an idea about how going through this particular activity, this process, might give some useful ideas for how you could redesign or redevelop a mobile learning activity.